All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. So we are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem this morning, still in Os Mem Vav. We're picking up, let's take a look on page Kuf Zayin in the Be'uri HaChasidus towards the end of the bottom paragraph. So remember again, in this incredible oath, Reb HaTzaddik is discussing the concept of Kol Ma Sheyomar Balabayis Asei Chutz Misei. Right? Whatever the Balabayis, in this case again metaphorically, the Balabayis refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whatever the Balabayis tells you to do, you should do, with the exception ultimately of getting out, of leaving. That you don't have to listen. So HaTzaddik highlighted this idea to mean that, of course, whatever the Ribbon Shalom tells me to do, I have to do. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says He no longer desires a relationship with me, and He wants me to distance myself from Him, I don't have to listen. Instead, I am permitted to forge forward with the establishment of a relationship and say, Ribbon Shalom, I don't want to leave your side. So remember again, Reb HaTzaddik spoke about this concept in the context of the Ma'apilim, the group of Jews who decided to defy the edict of Moshe Rabbeinu in the aftermath of the sin of the Meraglim, and still tried to enter into Eretz Yisrael, or Eretz Canaan at that point in time. So remember again, what was their logic? So we often look at them as unrepentant sinners. Reb HaTzaddik says, no, just the opposite. They genuinely felt that although HaKadosh Baruch Hu said you can't enter into the land, we don't have to listen to Hashem because of that. The Rebbe Shalom is telling us that He wants distance from us. That's the one thing we don't have to adhere to. So Reb HaTzaddik goes on, he says something so beautiful over here. If you look, again, page Kuf Zayin, Be'uri HaChasidus, right-hand side, bottom paragraph. V'chol ha'parsha haniskeres achar chet hameraglim, muvu'eres sham le'inyan hiskarvus ha'adam la'Hashem yizbarach. Ayin bizar, shabir v'himlitz es kol inyan ha'chet hameraglim, l'mashal v'remez ala Torah. But say this is truly beautiful. Reb HaTzaddik quotes the Zohar, and the Zohar explains that in fact, the entire story of the Meraglim is a metaphor. Obviously, it's an actual story. Of course, it occurred. But the Zohar is saying it also has incredible and profound metaphorical significance. What's the profound metaphorical significance of the story of the Meraglim? So listen to what he says. He explains, "V'himlis al kol inyan hachet hameraglim l'mashram v'remez ala Torah. She'HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer libnei Adam la'ayin b'Torah v'lasur al yada as haderech shebe'emtzausa yagiu el ha'olam haba kedei le'eschazik b'limuda u'b'shmirasa." See, interestingly enough, he says as follows, that in the Zohar's metaphor, entry into the land of Israel, right, sending the Meraglim to scout out Eretz Yisrael, is actually a metaphor for ultimately, again, Eretz Yisrael represents Torah. And each of us is a Meragel. Each of us is one of the Meraglim, one of the spies. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to go and seek out Torah. I want you to go and understand Torah. I want you to go and explore what Torah is. And I want you to figure out how, based on that Torah, to go out and live your life. That's what I would like you to be able to do. That's the significance, ultimately, again, of the story of the Meraglim. So he goes on, he says as follows. He'll say, see, you hear the metaphor? Eretz Yisrael is Torah. The Meraglim are each of us. My job now is to go out, or I should say to go into Torah, delve into Torah, understand Torah, and then figure out how to utilize it in order to live and to lead a meaningful and impactful life. He goes on, Ve'elu she'em mechusari emunah. Supposed to say, so what happens? People enter into our page Kuf Zayin. People enter into Torah. And what happens? Ve'elu she'em mechusari emunah hameraglim, left-hand column, Be'uri HaChasidus, page Kuf Zayin. So there are those who are mechusari emunah. There are those who lack proper requisite faith. Misyashim v'nimna'im lasok b'Torah. Machmas riboy hakashim shehem be'esek haTorah u'shmiras hamitzvos. So I will say, so what happens? There are some people who enter into Torah. They enter into the Eretz Yisrael of Torah. And also remember again, what did the Meraglim do when they came into Eretz Yisrael? What did they do? Interestingly enough, if you notice again, the Meraglim didn't lie about anything, right? They didn't make up information. But rather, what did the Meraglim do? They simply said, too difficult. Too difficult. At the end of the day, we can't do it. So too, there are some people who enter into the land of Torah, and they begin the journey, they begin the reconnaissance mission, and they say, you know what? Too difficult. Too difficult. Learning Torah is too difficult. Observing Torah is too difficult. Mitzvos, too difficult. All too difficult. Just like the Meraglim. They don't cast aspersion. It's just too overwhelming, too difficult. Kimo shameraglim nasu, kimo shameraglim ne'enshu. I just want to point out, I would urge you to think about this, because the truth is, it happens to be, if you're using this edition, I also put it out on the WhatsApp chat, but you'll look in the footnote, he quotes the entire Zohar, and it's really an incredible metaphor. Really an incredible metaphor to understand. I put it out probably on the WhatsApp chat last Monday. So he'll say, so again, such an incredible metaphor, if you think about it, that Eretz Canaan is Torah, and what happens? Moshe Rabbeinu sends Meraglim into Eretz Yisrael to scout out the land. So too, I want to lead a Torah-dik life, I want to lead a good life, so I begin to explore Torah. So the shaila is, what's the result of your exploration? So sometimes, unfortunately, we come to the conclusion of the Meraglim. Learning is too hard. Observance is too hard. Everything is too overwhelming. It's very nice, but it's Eretz Ocheles Yoshveha. This thing, mamish, is all consuming. It'll sap the life out of you. So what happens, says HaTzaddik? Ukimo shameraglim nenshu shlo lalos li Eretz Yisrael. Kimo kim isparish benimshal. Shaya onesh al-muchusari emuna elu. Hameraglim shelo yasigu esa olam haba. V'lo yisku el hiskarvus la'avinu shabashamayim. So what happens? The same way that the Meraglim ultimately lost Eretz Yisrael as a result of their disastrous report. Moshe says, you're not going to go in. So I will say, so what happens when a person gives up? Right? What happens when a person says, you know what, Torah is too overwhelming. Mitzvahs are too overwhelming. Right? Observance is too overwhelming. Relationship with Hashem is too overwhelming. So what happens? You lose it. As I will say, Eretz Yisrael doesn't run after you. And at the end of the day, Torah doesn't run after you. Interesting enough, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does run after us, which is just an interesting yisod. But that's for a different time. But the idea over here is the Moshe, and this is fine. Meraglim, you deliver your disastrous report, you're not going into Eretz Yisrael. If you don't make any effort to engage Torah, to engage mitzvahs, to engage a certain lifestyle because you feel that it's too difficult, then it's not even the punishment. The ramification is you just don't get it. You obviously don't have it in this world, and you don't have it in the world to come. It's a consequence. It's not a punishment, I will say. Remember, again, those are two very different things. A punishment could be punitive. A consequence is just the result. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, if you're not willing to engage, and if you're not willing to toil to acquire Eretz Yisrael, you don't get it. If you're not, the metaphoric meaning in the Zohar, if you're not willing to toil to acquire Torah, if you're not willing to toil to acquire spirituality, relationship with Hashem, you just don't get it. Not in this world, and not in the world to come. He goes on, V'lachein amar lehet Moshe Rabbeinu, al ta'alu ki ein Hashem bekir bechem. So we'll say this is fascinating. So remember again, what does Hashem say? What does Moshe say? So the next, now we're kind of combining all of the stories. So what happens the next morning? So remember again, day one, the Meraglim come back, it was really Tisha B'Av, right? The night of Tisha B'Av, they come back, they deliver their report. Klal Yisrael cries, the decree is handed down, you're not going into Eretz Yisrael, 40 years sojourn in the desert, the entire generation is going to die out. What happens the next morning, which I will say is incredible, is the morning of Tisha B'Av. There's this group, we call them the Ma'apilim. They want to go up, they want to go in. So what does Moshe say to them? Al talu, don't go up, ki ein Hashem bikir bechem. For Hashem is not in your midst. Which again, we translate to understand means what? Hashem is not with you. And if Hashem's not with you, you're not going to be successful. V'alzeh he'epilu v'is'akshu lalos v'lihikonis li'eretz Yisrael af neged ritzon Hashem b'isparach. So we'll say, there's a lot of things happening right over here. So HaTzaddik says you have to understand the profundity of this. The profundity of this is Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them explicitly, God is not with you. God is not with you. And yet what? What happened? They went anyway. Now we'll say, now watch this. He says, Mishum shesavru sheba'ofen zeh heim yisku lihiskayv l'Hashem yizrach. So we'll say, so now we're kind of jumping a little bit here. So remember, let me close out the first theme. So the first part of HaTzaddik was just saying is, by the way, the whole Meraglim story is not just a story about conquest of Eretz Yisrael. It's also a metaphoric story about the Jew and his acquisition of spirituality, how you acquire Torah, and a recognition that it doesn't come easily. And if you're scared off by the struggle, just understand you will accomplish and acquire nothing. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ki'in Hashem bekir bechem. If you weren't willing to engage in the struggle when I needed you to engage in the struggle, Hashem's not going to be with you, not in this world and not in the world to come. Now Rabbi said, let's loop this back. So remember again, Reb Tzaddik was saying before, this concept of kol ma sheyomar elecha balabayis asay chutz mitzay. Whatever Hashem tells you to do, you should do, with the exception of if God tells you to get out. If God tells you He doesn't want you anymore, don't listen, and keep trying to engage. So remember again, Reb Tzaddik says, who's the paradigmatic example of this? The Ma'apilim, this group. Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, Hashem is not with you. Hashem is not with you. And yet what happens? They went anyway. Crazy. We'll say, if you think about it, by the way, the Ma'apilim story is more crazy than the Meraglim story. Right? Think about this just a moment. The Meraglim made a mistake. A dramatic mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. Okay, but one can make the argument that they were kind of left to their own devices in certain respects. The Ma'apilim are getting ready to march on Eretz Yisrael the morning after the Meraglim debacle, and Moshe says, God's not with you. God's not with you. It's not going to work. So what are you thinking going? Right? What's going through your head that you're going? So Elamai Reb Tzaddik says, because what's happening over here? Mishum shesavru, sheba'ofen zeh, hem yisku liskarev l'Hashem yisbarach. Gam ki she'omer lahem balabayis kiviyachol tzei, v'she'im be'efsharusam liskarev alav keis. Ultimately, again, they literally thought that even though Moshe Rabbeinu said, God is not with you, they'll still be successful. Why? Because we don't have to listen to Hashem when He tells us to go away. We have to listen to Hashem. Now I will say, what I want to point out over here, I'll read this next line, then we'll have to stop over here for today. It says, Kimo sha'amru, v'kimo sha'am v'hamakar lakach, she'eskav v'sadam ba'ofen kazet hatzliach, kimo sha'amru chachaminu zal, shechutzbasa, we'll pick up with this concept tomorrow, but this is what Chazal call, and they say that chutzpah is like monarchy without a crown, which also means that sometimes in life, chutzpah is a very good thing. Chutzpah is a very good thing. Now we'll say, now please use that very carefully, right? Very carefully. We'll discuss what this means. I will say, but sometimes what it means is, you have to be chutzpahdik to get what you want. Now, I'm sure this is true also. This is probably true in all areas of life. I'm sure it's true in the business world, right? As they say, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't ask, you don't get. And sometimes you have to ask pretty forcefully, right? And sometimes you can't just ask. Sometimes you have to push. If you don't push, you don't get. So there's an element, but in the realm of ruchnius, we're seeing this concept as well. That sometimes the only way to accomplish what you need to accomplish in the realm of ruchnius is chutzpah. But lest you think that chutzpah is a desired approach, so we're going to see the Zohar calls, or the Gemara calls, chutzpah is monarchy without the crown. So I'll say, what does that mean, monarchy without the crown? So you could be the king without the crown, but you're really missing something. Right? There's an important monarchical accessory that is missing from you if you don't have the crown. So we'll have to stop over here. But I will say what I just want to point out, and this I'll really end with, because this is really quite fascinating, is the following interesting dynamic. You see, on one hand, Reb Tzaddik told us, Kol ma shetomar elecha balabayis aseh chutz mitzeh, which means that listen to everything that God tells you except when God tells you to get out. Yet, interestingly enough, the paradigmatic example of that is the Ma'apilim. And interestingly enough, the Ma'apilim follow this advice. They try to go into the land, even though Hashem says to them, Moshe says to them, it's not going to work. And what was the result? Right, they failed. So, I just want to point something out. Even though HaTzaddik is using this as the paradigmatic example, the job of the Jew is to always try to engage HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if the Ribbon Shalom apparently doesn't desire that engagement. That's what it is. But it doesn't always mean that things work out, which is very interesting. So it's almost like my job is to try to pursue constant engagement with the Ribbon Shalom. But don't think that just because you always push, you get what you want. So this is the interesting question. It sounds like from Reb Tzaddik, they did the right thing, which is a little bit mind-blowing, because Moshe Rabbeinu is sitting there telling them, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. So Meretz Hashem, to be continued tomorrow. We'll say, which again is essentially Reb Tzaddik is dealing with over here, which is a very important life yesod, is how much chutzpah is good chutzpah, right? Which is something many of us struggle with each and every day, right? How much chutzpah is good, and how much chutzpah just becomes a detriment, right? Meretz Hashem, to be continued.